On the 31st of January 1968, at 2:47 in the morning Indochina time in Saigon, 19 Viet Cong sappers blow a hole in the outer wall of the United States Embassy and rush the compound. For the next 6 hours, military police and Marine Guards trade fire across the embassy lawn, while American correspondents film from the street. By dawn, all 19 attackers lie dead, but the images stream worldwide. Guerrillas inside America's most secure compound in South Vietnam. That same night, approximately 84,000 People's Army of Vietnam and Viet Cong troops strike 36 of 44 provincial capitals and more than 100 district towns across the country. The timing exploits the Tet Lunar New Year ceasefire. The firecracker to gunshot snap catches Allied forces mid-celebration. The myth takes shape in real time. Tet 1968 is a stunning surprise that exposes American weakness and proves the war unwinnable. Television broadcasts show United States forces fighting inside the embassy compound, Army of the Republic of Vietnam troops retreating in Saigon streets, and the ancient citadel of Hue under enemy flags. By late February, Walter Cronkite tells millions of viewers that the war is a stalemate and negotiation is the only rational way out. Public opinion polls in the United States shift sharply. President Lyndon Johnson's approval on Vietnam plummets. The narrative solidifies. Tet was a military and psychological victory for Hanoi, a turning point that broke American will. Historians later debate whether Tet was military defeat but political triumph for the communists. The mechanism begins months before the offensive, as Hanoi shifts strategy from protracted guerrilla war to coordinated urban assault. In late 1967, General Von Nguyen Giap and the Politburo authorized Resolution 13, calling for simultaneous attacks on cities to trigger a general uprising and force United States withdrawal. ARVN divisions infiltrate south through Laos and Cambodia. Viet Cong main force battalions pre-position near target cities. In Saigon, VC sappers hide weapons in flour trucks, coffins, and safe houses. Reconnaissance teams map embassy walls, police stations, and the presidential palace. The plan depends on synchronization. Approximately 84,000 troops will strike 36 provincial capitals, more than 100 district towns, and dozens of military installations simultaneously. Timing exploits the Tet ceasefire when half of ARVN forces are on leave and United States units stand down for the holiday. Hanoi expects urban populations to rise against the Saigon government. Cadres carry lists of officials to arrest and buildings to seize. On the 30th of January 1968, some units jump the gun and attack Da Nang, Nha Trang, and towns in Second Corps, giving MACV a few hours. Warning: at 3 in the morning, on the 31st of January 1968, the main wave crashes across South Vietnam. In Saigon, VC commandos assault the embassy, the presidential palace, the Joint General Staff compound, the national radio station, and Tan Son Nhat Air Base. In Hue, 10 PAVN and VC battalions storm the citadel, raise the National Liberation Front flag, and begin a 26-day occupation. In Can Tho, Mai Tho, Ben Tre, and across the Delta, VC units seize district headquarters and police stations. The firecracker to gunshot snap of Tet morning becomes hours of close-quarters combat. But the mechanism misfires almost immediately. The general uprising does not occur. Urban populations do not join the attackers. Most civilians shelter in place or flee. ARVN troops, many recalled from leave, fight harder than Hanoi anticipates. Local forces hold key positions until United States reinforcements arrive. By the 1st of February, most cities except Hue are back under government control, though pockets of resistance persist for weeks. The VC commit their best units, main force battalions, urban sappers, political cadres, and expose them to concentrated firepower. United States helicopter gunships, artillery, and airstrikes hammer VC positions in urban areas. ARVN forces know the terrain and fight block by block. The first proof lies in the numbers, no headline captures. Approximately 84,000 PAVN and Viet Cong troops participate in the Tet Offensive. Between 40,000 and 58,000 are killed in action by March 1968. Another 6,000 are captured. The casualty rate is catastrophic by any military standard. For comparison, Allied losses, United States and ARVN combined, are approximately 9,000 killed in the same period. The losses are significant, but they represent a small fraction of total strength. The PAVN and VC losses gut entire main force battalions and local force companies. In Saigon, the 19 sappers who breached the United States Embassy compound are all killed. None escape. Across the city, VC battalions assigned to hold the radio station, the presidential palace, and key bridges are wiped out within 48 hours. In Ben Tre province, a VC main force regiment seizes the provincial capital on the 31st of January. By the 3rd of February, the regiment has been destroyed by airstrikes and ARVN counterattacks. The town is flattened. But the military fact remains. The VC regiment ceases to exist as a fighting force. In Hue, the battle lasts 26 days and produces some of the heaviest urban combat of the war. PAVN and VC forces lose an estimated 5,000 killed. ARVN 1st Division and United States Marines lose approximately 500 combined. Major General No Quang Truong, commanding ARVN 1st Division, coordinates the counterattack with methodical precision. His forces clear the New City, south of the Perfume River, in 1 week. Marine battalions spend 3 more weeks clearing the citadel north of the river. By the 25th of February 1968, the NLF flag comes down. Hue is back under government control. MACV intelligence assessments in March 1968 show VC main force strength dropping by 30 to 40% nationwide. In some provinces, the losses are even steeper. VC cadre strength in Long An province falls by more than 50%. These cadres are the nervous system of the insurgency. They collect intelligence, recruit fighters, levy taxes, and maintain shadow governance. Replacing a main force soldier takes weeks. Replacing a trained political cadre takes years. Captured VC documents from February and March 1968 reveal internal panic. Units report inability to recruit, loss of local support networks, and failure to resupply. General William C. Westmoreland, commander of United States Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, briefs the press in early February. The enemy has exposed himself, and we are hurting him badly. He will not be able to sustain this level of attack. Westmoreland's assessment is dismissed as spin by American journalists, but MACV intelligence logs supported. VC losses are unsustainable. Colonel Bui Tin, a PAVN officer who later serves as a journalist and memoirist, reflects on Tet's cost decades after the war. The Viet Cong lost the best of their cadres. After Tet, the war in the south became a North Vietnamese war. We had to rebuild everything with northern cadres and soldiers. The shift is real. From mid-1968 onward, PAVN regular divisions increasingly replace VC main force units in major operations. The Viet Cong never regain their pre-Tet strength in the southern provinces. By 1969, MACV intelligence reports that VC-initiated attacks have dropped by more than 60% compared to late 1967. The offensive was supposed to ignite a general uprising. Instead, it ignited a funeral pyre for the southern insurgency. Hanoi gambled that shock would compensate for casualties. The math did not work. Urban combat is a meat grinder, and the VC fed their best units into it. The Americans and ARVN absorbed losses and reinforced. The VC could not. Tet produced dramatic images, guerrillas in the embassy, the citadel under siege, but images do not replace battalions. By April 1968, VC main force units are hollowed out. Recruitment slows as civilians see the cost of joining. Not triumph, but immolation. The second proof emerges in the contrast between media narrative and ground reality. On the 27th of February 1968, CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite returns from Vietnam and delivers an on-air editorial. It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. Cronkite's assessment reflects widespread media interpretation. Tet proves the war is unwinnable, American strategy has failed, and negotiation is the only exit. His words carry immense weight. President Johnson reportedly says, "If I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America." Public opinion polls shift sharply. Approval for Johnson's handling of the war drops from 40% to 26% in 2 months. The narrative takes hold. Tet is a psychological and political victory for Hanoi, regardless of battlefield losses. But the narrative diverges from what Allied commanders and intelligence officers see on the ground. In Saigon, ARVN and United States forces retake every objective within a week. VC units dissolve into the city or die in place. In the Mekong Delta, provincial capitals return to government control by early February. VC infrastructure collapses in districts that were contested before Tet. In First Corps, the Battle for Hue dominates headlines, but once the citadel falls on the 25th of February, PAVN and VC forces retreat into the mountains, leaving thousands of dead behind. MACV intelligence summaries in March 1968 document unprecedented VC losses and recruitment failures. Yet, American news coverage focuses on the shock of the initial attacks, the duration of urban combat, and Westmoreland's request for 206,000 additional troops. The troop request, leaked to the New York Times in March, is interpreted as evidence that the war is going badly. In fact, Westmoreland seeks reinforcements to exploit VC weakness and pursue ARVN units into Laos and Cambodia, an offensive strategy, not a defensive one. But the context is lost. The headline reads as desperation. Peter Braystrup, a Washington Post correspondent who covered Tet, later spends years analyzing the media's performance. In his 1977 study, The Big Story, he documents how initial reports emphasized chaos and surprise, but failed to follow up on the military outcome. The media emphasized the shock and the drama, but largely missed the story of what happened next, the decimation of the Viet Cong. Braystrup finds that coverage of Tet peaks in the first 2 weeks, when outcomes are uncertain, and drops sharply in March, when VC losses become clear. The story that sells is shock. The story that matters is attrition. Television networks replay footage of the embassy breach, the street execution of a VC prisoner by Saigon Police Chief Nguyen Ngoc Loan, and refugees fleeing burning neighborhoods. These images are real and powerful, but they are not the whole picture. The images do not show VC body stacks outside Tan Son Nhut, captured weapons caches in Cho Lon, or the empty VC safe houses raided by ARVN intelligence. The cameras leave Hue before ARVN engineers begin counting enemy dead in the rubble. The narrative becomes, Tet was a military draw at best, a political disaster for the United States at worst. The military reality becomes, Tet was a catastrophic defeat for the Viet Cong, who never recover their pre-offensive strength. General Von Nguyen Giap, architect of the offensive, faces internal criticism within the Politburo after Tet. We did not achieve the general uprising we had hoped for. The losses were greater than we anticipated, but the offensive changed the political situation in America, and that was decisive. Giap frames Tet as a political success despite military failure, a narrative that aligns with the American media's interpretation. But inside South Vietnam, VC province committees send desperate reports to Hanoi, cadres dead, recruits unavailable, operations suspended. The political shift in America is real. The military shift in Vietnam is equally real and opposite. American will weakens, Viet Cong capability collapses. The firecracker to gunshot snap echoed through American living rooms. The silence of VC cadre networks went unrecorded, not stalemate but divergence. American perception versus Vietnamese reality. The third proof is written in the strategic consequences that unfold over the next 2 years. In the immediate aftermath of Tet, Hanoi tries to sustain momentum with follow-up offensives in May and August 1968, dubbed Mini-Tet. Both fail to replicate the surprise or scale of the January attacks. Both produce heavy casualties without territorial gains. By late 1968, PAVN divisions replace VC main force units as the primary combat force in the South. The Viet Cong transition from independent operations to auxiliary roles. Porters, guides, local security, provincial VC strength in the Mekong Delta, once the insurgency's heartland, drops to its lowest levels since the early 1960s. In Long An Province, a key VC stronghold southwest of Saigon, MACV reports that VC battalion strength falls from approximately 3,500 fighters in late 1967 to fewer than 1,500 by mid-1969. Local force companies disintegrate. Political cadres operate in isolation, unable to coordinate. The pacification program, long stalled by VC intimidation and assassination, accelerates after Tet. ARVN regional and popular forces, often derided as ineffective, grow in confidence and capability after successfully defending villages during the offensive. By 1969, the accelerated pacification campaign extends government control into hundreds of contested hamlets. Hamlet evaluation system data, while imperfect, shows a sharp increase in secure hamlets from 1968 to 1970. VC tax collection, once reliable in many provinces, collapses. Cadres report inability to sustain logistics networks. Captured documents from 1969 describe chronic shortages of rice, medicine, and ammunition in VC base areas. Recruitment, the lifeblood of insurgency, stalls, young men who once joined or were drafted by the VC now evade both sides or join ARVN. The VC's People's War model depends on mass mobilization. After Tet, the masses are not mobilizing. Colonel Bui Tin later writes that Tet destroyed the revolutionary base in the south. We had to rebuild everything with northern cadres and soldiers. The rebuilding never fully succeeds. The VC remain a diminished force until the North Vietnamese conventional invasion of 1975. Meanwhile, United States domestic opposition to the war intensifies, not because the military situation deteriorates, but because the public loses faith in the strategy's viability. President Johnson announces on the 31st of March 1968 that he will not seek re-election and that he is limiting bombing of North Vietnam to pursue negotiations. The announcement is framed as a response to Tet, but it also reflects broader political pressures unrelated to battlefield outcomes. Peace talks begin in Paris in May 1968. They will drag on for 5 years. Richard Nixon wins the presidency in November 1968 on a platform of peace with honor and Vietnamization, shifting combat responsibility to ARVN. United States troop levels peak at 543,000 in early 1969. Then begin a gradual drawdown. By 1970, American forces are withdrawing even as ARVN performance improves and VC strength remains suppressed. The paradox deepens. The military situation in South Vietnam is more favorable to the Allies in 1969 through 1970 than at any point since 1965. Yet American commitment is unraveling. Tet created a political dynamic in the United States that could not be reversed by battlefield success. The perception break that the war was unwinnable became self-reinforcing, regardless of subsequent VC collapse. Hanoi understands this dynamic and shifts strategy accordingly. Prolong the conflict, accept lower tempo, wait for American withdrawal. The Politburo concludes that while the general offensive failed militarily, it succeeded in fracturing American political will. From 1969 onward, the war becomes a waiting game. Can ARVN stand alone before United States support evaporates? The Viet Cong's collapse after Tet forces Hanoi to rely on PAVN regulars, transforming the conflict from insurgency to conventional invasion. The 1972 Easter Offensive and the 1975 Spring Offensive are PAVN operations. The VC play marginal roles. By 1975, when North Vietnamese tanks roll into Saigon, the Viet Cong political infrastructure that once controlled villages across the South has been defunct for 7 years. Tet broke the VC, the perception break broke American will, the combination eventually broke South Vietnam, not a turning point but a breaking point for the Viet Cong. The fourth proof lies in what happens in Hue during the 26-day battle, the longest and bloodiest fight of the offensive. On the 31st of January 1968 at 3:40 in the morning, 10 PAVN and VC battalions, approximately 7,500 troops, storm the city from multiple directions. By dawn, they control most of the city, including the ancient citadel, the seat of Vietnam's imperial past. The NLF flag flies over the citadel walls. VC cadres execute a prepared list of enemies of the people. Over the next 3 weeks, execution squads kill an estimated 2,800 to 6,000 civilians, teachers, civil servants, Catholic priests, anyone associated with the Saigon government. Mass graves are discovered in the months after the battle, but while the executions proceed, ARVN and United States forces prepare a methodical counterattack. Major General Ngo Quang Truong, commanding ARVN 1st Division, establishes a command post north of the city and coordinates with United States Marine battalions to the south. We will retake the city block by block, building by building. Speed matters less than thoroughness. The people of Hue must see that their government fights to protect them, not destroy them. Truong's approach contrasts with the United States doctrine, which emphasizes firepower and maneuver. He insists on minimizing civilian casualties and preserving Hue's cultural sites where possible. ARVN troops clear the new city south of the Perfume River in 1 week, fighting house to house with small arms and grenades. The citadel, north of the river, proves far more difficult. Its walls are 3 meters thick and designed to withstand siege. United States Marine battalions, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, and 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, assault the citadel from the southeast, supported by naval gunfire and airstrikes. The rules of engagement initially restrict heavy weapons inside the citadel to preserve historic structures, but the restrictions are gradually lifted as PAVN resistance stiffens. Marines fight room to room through the Imperial Palace complex. Every courtyard and corridor is contested. PAVN snipers, entrenched in the palace towers, pick off Marines at ranges under 50 meters. Marine Corps tank platoons breach the citadel gates and provide direct fire support, blasting PAVN fighting positions at point-blank range. ARVN airborne battalions, inserted by helicopter, attack from the north and west, tightening the noose. By the 18th of February, PAVN commanders realize the position is untenable and begin withdrawing troops under cover of darkness. The retreat is orderly at first, then collapses into rout as United States airstrikes and artillery hammer the withdrawal routes. On the 24th of February, ARVN troops lower the NLF flag from the citadel and raise the South Vietnamese flag. The battle officially ends on the 25th of February, 1968. Hue is back under government control. The human cost is staggering. Approximately 5,000 PAVN and VC killed, 500 ARVN and United States troops killed, and between 2,800 and 6,000 civilians executed or killed in the crossfire. More than 100,000 civilians are displaced. Entire neighborhoods are reduced to rubble. But militarily, the battle is a decisive Allied victory. PAVN loses elite units, including the 6th Regiment and elements of the 324th Bravo Division, that cannot be easily replaced. VC political cadres who orchestrated the executions are themselves hunted down and killed or captured in the weeks after the battle. The Hue VC apparatus, once one of the most effective in South Vietnam, is shattered. General Truong later reflects that the battle proved ARVN could fight and win without heavy United States ground support. His 1st Division bore the brunt of the fighting and performed with discipline and courage. The battle also exposes a harsh truth. Urban combat favors defenders with firepower and logistics, not attackers relying on surprise. PAVN and VC troops entered Hue with ammunition for a few days of fighting. The battle lasted 26 days. Resupply was impossible. They fought with dwindling stocks until retreat was the only option. The siege that was supposed to spark nationwide revolt instead became a killing ground. The city that was supposed to ignite revolt became the graveyard of the offensive's ambitions. Not a triumph, but a tomb. By March 1968, the tactical picture is clear. The Viet Cong have lost between 40,000 and 58,000 troops. Their political infrastructure is shattered, and they cannot sustain offensive operations. But the political picture in the United States is equally clear. Public support for the war has collapsed. President Johnson will not seek re-election, and negotiations are beginning. The paradox is complete. Hanoi loses the battles, but wins the perception war. The question is not who won Tet, but whether winning the narrative matters more than winning the fight. The 5th and final proof is institutional, how the perception break reshapes both American strategy and communist doctrine in ways neither side anticipates. In Washington, Tet triggers a strategic reassessment that will ultimately lead to Vietnamization and United States withdrawal. General Westmoreland's request for 206,000 additional troops, leaked to the New York Times on the 10th of March 1968, is seen not as a plan to exploit VC weakness, but as evidence of failure. Defense Secretary Clark Clifford, newly appointed, conducts a comprehensive review and concludes that the war is unwinnable at acceptable cost. On the 31st of March 1968, President Johnson announces a partial bombing halt and his decision not to seek re-election. I shall not seek, and I will not, accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president. The speech is a turning point. The United States is no longer seeking military victory, but a negotiated exit. The shift is driven entirely by domestic politics, not battlefield conditions. Yet Tet is the catalyst. In Saigon, President Nguyen Van Thieu and his generals see the same battlefield assessments as MACV and reach the opposite conclusion. The war is winnable if the Allies press their advantage. ARVN commanders argue for offensive operations into VC base areas, aggressive pacification, and sustained pressure while the enemy is weak. But American political will is already eroding. The debate in Washington is not how to win, but how to leave. The disconnect between Saigon and Washington becomes unbridgeable. Meanwhile, in Hanoi, the Politburo debates what Tet means. General Von Nguyen Giap's gamble produced catastrophic losses but also fractured American resolve. Hardliners argue that the losses prove the strategy failed. Moderates argue that the political outcome in America validates the strategy. The debate is resolved in favor of continuation. The war will continue, but at lower intensity, while the Paris peace talks proceed. Hanoi's new calculus is simple. Wait for American withdrawal, rebuild PAVN strength, and prepare for a conventional invasion when the time is right. The southern insurgency, the Viet Cong, is no longer central to the strategy. It has been expended. The strategic consequence is a shift from protracted people's war to protracted conventional war. PAVN divisions, not VC guerrillas, will bear the burden of future offensives. The shift is evident in the 1972 Easter Offensive, a mechanized invasion with tanks and artillery, and again in the 1975 Spring Offensive that ends the war. The Viet Cong, once the face of the revolution, become auxiliaries and propagandists. The real fighting is done by Northerners. In the United States, the perception break triggered by Tet fuels the anti-war movement and shapes the 1968 presidential election. Democratic candidate Hubert Humphrey, tied to Johnson's policies, loses narrowly to Richard Nixon, who promises peace with honor. Nixon's strategy, Vietnamization, aims to build up ARVN while withdrawing United States troops, buying time for a negotiated settlement. But Vietnamization depends on American political patience, which is in short supply after Tet. United States troop levels peak at 543,000 in April 1969 and begin a steady drawdown. By 1972, fewer than 100,000 United States troops remain, and most are advisors or support personnel. ARVN is left to fight increasingly alone, even as PAVN's strength rebuilds. The Easter Offensive of 1972 tests Vietnamization. PAVN invades with 14 divisions, supported by tanks and artillery. ARVN forces, with massive United States air support, repel the invasion and inflict heavy losses on PAVN. The performance suggests that ARVN can hold if adequately supported, but United States domestic politics are moving in the opposite direction. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in January 1973, provide for a ceasefire, United States withdrawal, and the return of prisoners of war. The accords do not require North Vietnamese forces to leave the South. They simply freeze positions. It is a surrender disguised as a settlement. United States forces complete their withdrawal by March 1973. Congress cuts aid to South Vietnam in 1974. In 1975, PAVN launches the Spring Offensive, a conventional invasion with 18 divisions. ARVN collapses in less than 2 months. Saigon falls on the 30th of April 1975. The collapse is rapid, not because ARVN cannot fight, it performed well in 1972, but because United States support has evaporated. Air support, logistics, and funding are gone. ARVN is left to fight a mechanized army with dwindling ammunition and no resupply. The final offensive is a North Vietnamese victory, but it is built on the ruins of the Viet Cong, sacrificed in 1968. Tet 1968 set the conditions for 1975. It destroyed the Southern insurgency, fractured American will, and forced Hanoi to shift to conventional war. The irony is profound. The offensive that was supposed to win the war quickly instead created a 7-year delay. But the delay worked in Hanoi's favor. American withdrawal made victory inevitable once patience outlasted commitment. The perception break was real and consequential. It shaped decisions in Washington, Saigon, and Hanoi. But the perception was backwards. Tet was not proof that the war was unwinnable. It was proof that the Viet Cong were beatable. What was unwinnable was the political war in America, where images mattered more than casualty counts. General Westmoreland was right that the enemy was hurt badly. Walter Cronkite was right that the war felt like a stalemate. Both men were looking at the same war but seeing different metrics. One counted bodies, the other counted will. The lesson is uncomfortable. Perception can override reality in democratic wars, and adversaries can exploit that gap. Hanoi did not plan Tet as a perception operation. They planned it as a knockout blow. When the blow failed militarily, they pivoted to exploit the political fallout in America. The pivot worked, but it required sacrificing the Viet Cong, the very force that had sustained the revolution for a decade. The cost was tens of thousands of cadres, the collapse of the insurgency, and the transformation of the war into a conventional northern invasion. Tet 1968 was not the beginning of the end for America. It was the end of the beginning. For the Viet Cong, the offensive that was supposed to break American will instead broke the Southern Revolution. Shock won headlines. Attrition decided wars. Perception decided who would fight the next 7 years. The offensive was a military catastrophe that became a political windfall. The losses were real. The victory was narrative. The cadres died. The story lived. Not a turning point, but a breaking point. For the VC, for American will, for the illusion that battlefield success guarantees strategic victory. By April 1968, the tactical results of Tet are undeniable. PAVN and Viet Cong forces have lost 40,000 to 58,000 killed. The Southern insurgency is shattered, and no general uprising has occurred. Allied forces have retaken every city, every district town, every objective seized during the offensive. The Viet Cong will never again mount operations at the scale or intensity of January 1968, but the strategic results are equally undeniable. American public support for the war has collapsed, President Johnson will not seek re-election, and the United States is negotiating an exit. The perception break is complete, and it cannot be undone by battlefield victories. In Vietnam, the war will continue for 7 more years, but its character has changed. The Viet Cong, once the vanguard of the revolution, are reduced to auxiliaries. PAVN regulars will carry the fight. The war becomes conventional, mechanized, attritional, no longer an insurgency, but an invasion deferred. In America, the war becomes a domestic political crisis that will shape a generation's view of military intervention. Tet produces a paradox no doctrine anticipated. A tactical disaster that becomes a strategic success, not because of what happened on the battlefield, but because of what Americans believed happened. Hanoi did not plan for this outcome. They adapted to it. The Politburo learned that patience and propaganda could outlast firepower and body counts. The lesson was costly, tens of thousands of Southern cadres dead, but it worked. By 1975, when North Vietnamese tanks roll into Saigon, the victory belongs to PAVN, not the Viet Cong. The offensive did not win the war, it changed the war, it forced the Viet Cong into urban killing grounds where they were annihilated, it fractured American will at the moment Allied forces gained the upper hand. It proved that shock matters more than results, at least in the short term. But it also proved that attrition decides wars in the long term, and the Viet Cong paid the price. The greatest victory became their greatest defeat. The greatest defeat paved the path to eventual victory for Hanoi, not because Tet worked as planned, but because its failure forced a new strategy. The offensive that broke the Viet Cong also broke the illusion that battlefield success guarantees strategic victory. Shock wins headlines. Attrition decides wars. On the 31st of January 1968, approximately 84,000 PAVN and Viet Cong troops attacked 36 provincial capitals, betting that surprise would break American will and ignite popular revolt. Instead, between 40,000 and 58,000 died in urban killing grounds. The Southern insurgency collapsed, and the VC political infrastructure never recovered. The perception break in America was real, but so was the bloodletting in Vietnam. Hanoi won the narrative, the Viet Cong paid the price.